Welcome, everyone. Suki Kim first went to North Korea. She was the only writer to have lived undercover in North Korea. In February 2008, she traveled with the New York Philharmonic to write her article called A Really Big Show. She was commissioned by Harper's Magazine. After that, she went back again undercover to North Korea to write her book. She went there specifically as an undercover journalist. She did not go as a tourist. She did not go to check out her ancestors and where she came from. She went as an undercover journalist. And we'll come to that issue at the end of the program because the way she was slotted in the end was very disconcerting. Just to start on a lighter note, what did you think of the film, The Interview?
I mean, obviously, I think you can guess what I think about that. I wrote about it, actually. I did a piece on that at some point. I think comedy is the way we process these things. But if Americans are not prepared to make comedy about 9/11, even at this point, I don't think that you could do a movie like that as the Gulag is functioning currently. And I think really, I mean, you can't even argue what's in the film, but the movie is really about two white guys rescuing North Korea by blowing up their leader. And actually, in reality, it's the other way around. The Korea was divided by two white men who drew up that line of the 38th parallel. So I think irony was completely lost. And I just think in the media, there is this incredible laziness where North Korea becomes the subject of humor. And I don't know why that is. People think Kim Jong-un's haircut is really funny. And I don't know what's so funny about that. So I think that somehow it's okay to laugh about North Korea. And there's something, as a human being, I find it unacceptable.
I understand that your pain at seeing your country divided in two and seeing what torture young people and the whole of North Korean goes through. But there is a way of dealing with pain also, which includes satire, such as the film Life is Beautiful, which was about the Holocaust.
Decades have passed since. I think that there's something...
So you feel that it's more important now for the world to understand where North Korea is, what is happening there, and to engage with it. And the biggest problem is the disengagement, and that kind of humor is actually sidesteps the real issue.
I just think that the one way people justify war usually is to dehumanize that subject, where the sufferings of people dying in war, whether it's Syria or wherever that is, no longer seem real to us. Whether it's because it's funny, or it doesn't feel human. I think the only way we can care about these subjects is if we can empathize with it. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to empathize with something that is a cartoon character, And I think that we need to, in the subject of North Korea, the seriousness of this. You just saw the NASA photo. Yeah, that world is continuing. It's not stopping. And I think for us to care to do something, because it's not going to stop unless we do something. And I think that we look at them as human beings, like our family. Mm-hmm. If our family is in a gulag, under daily torture, would we find that funny?
Just to inform the audience, while Suki was in the school teaching, she is watched all the time. They have minders. A minder is somebody who follows you everywhere. There is no privacy at all. You cannot have a conversation with anyone without the minder being there. But there's a passage which I will read from your book in which you're saying goodbye to your minder. And I'd like you to comment on that, which is when you're boarding the chartered flight with everyone in our mission, I told Mr. Rhee that I was sick of this division and that I would probably never see him again because the people of his country were not allowed to leave or even have contact with the rest of the world, and that his country was so isolated that even I, a fellow Korean, could only visit as part of the American delegation. This was when you were with the orchestra. And that it broke my heart to see how bad things really were. I said all this standing on that tarmac, my face covered with tears, the floodgates open after 36 hours of enforced silence. This, in hindsight, was thoughtless of me. And you found that they were crying too. And ironically, you met him again. And when you met him the second time, there was no acknowledgement of that shared experience. So, did you ever think that this was something that you could have brought up with him, when you were leaving at least?
No, because I think that by the time I lived there, I really understood the fear that, as much as I could, because I don't think anybody could really, the fear they live, the daily fear they live under. What that means, it's actually the best way to think about it is on abuse victims, that you compartmentalize a lot of things. So he might have seen me and shared tears with me in 2008, 2011. I was there under different circumstances. He never brought it up, and I never would have brought it up in return, because I realized it probably wasn't something we were allowed to discuss. And if he had cried then, what does it matter now? Because that doesn't change his daily lives. Daily lives there, everybody, not just me, everybody's under surveillance, because they all have to meet every Saturday to report on each other. So I really understood it, much better my final time there, and I think that abuse was frightening, because the fact you could never ever share experiences and talk about it.
Now, Suki was given guidelines on what she was allowed to speak about. There were certain subjects that she was not allowed to address at all. All the classes that she was going to teach had to be submitted, and they had to receive an okay before she taught them. Can you imagine, especially for Indians, being told that you're not, in personal lives, not being allowed to talk about certain subjects at all, not being able to share anything? And I think there were times when you, towards the end, where you almost crossed the line, and there was a lot of fear and confusion in your part, as well as the student who had that. We'll come to that. But the students were told constantly with slogans, keep your feet firmly on the ground of your motherland and keep your eyes on the world. Let's think in our way and create in our way. Sometimes the longer you are inside a prison, you've written, the harder it is to fathom what is possible beyond its walls. Now, these students had the intranet. They do not have the internet. They have never heard of Facebook or Twitter or Google. Google, they're allowed to Google? No.
No.
So they really have no idea what is happening in the outside world. The only world they know is what they're exposed to, which is basically Kim Il-un now, yeah, and all the leaders' history, their personal history, that's it. Did you find at any time any curiosity that crossed the line from your students, that they would ask you something that you wanted to tell them, but you couldn't? Yeah, well, there in your book many incidences. But did you find a student frustrated, fed up?
It's not a society where you can express things like that, which is why I employed methods like letter writing or essay writing in order to try to understand what they're thinking. Because, I didn't go in there trying to get Wikipedia information. That stuff you can find out, how many gulags and how many, percentages and all that. How they're thinking is what we don't know. And how they're thinking is, are they curious? Of course they are curious. Human beings. At the same time, they're raised differently. They're raised under the system of the great leader. And they've also been under tremendous abuse, because if they don't follow their regime's guideline, then them and their families will get persecuted. So when you consider all these things, there's a curiosity, but there's also resilience to that, and also they know they have to censor themselves. So all these things coexist. The way that I get really frustrated when people bring up how North Korea, there must be like robots, following cult. Not really. They're just human beings, but who are living under extreme case of abuse, and this was elite. So if you can imagine for the rest of North Korea.
It's not just controlling their emotions. They also at times had to work up emotions. For example, when the great leader died, if you were not upset enough, if you were not crying loud enough, you did not show enough emotion according to the minders, you could get into serious trouble. So you've written, we accepted our situation meekly. how quickly we became prisoners, how quickly we gave up our freedom, how quickly we tolerated the loss of that freedom, like a child being abused in silence. In this world, there were no individual demands, and asking permission for everything was infantilizing. How do you say it? Infantilizing. So we began to understand our students who had never been able to do anything on their own. The notion of following your heart's desire, of going wherever you choose, did not exist here. And I did not see any way to let them know what it felt like, especially since after so little time in their system, I had lost my own sense of freedom. Do you then come to the conclusion that human beings adjust to the worst of circumstances and make it the new normal?
You know, I think that's what, I feel like my decade of pursuit and actually having lived in that system made me realize how things like concentration camps under Hitler was possible, where people were being gassed. And also not only that reality, but how the rest of the world sat back in the distance and allowed that to happen. So yes, I do think that under abuse, we also adjust to that abuse pretty quickly, because we also know if we don't listen to the abuser, we will be punished and our families will be punished. And it was actually remarkable. You know, people said, you know, when you come out and I'm back in Manhattan, then people would say things like, why didn't you run away? Or like, you should have just gone into town and tried to like interview people. You really can't when you're in a system where everything you do, the minders will get punished, the students I talk to might die. You know, it's just, you are not only, like, you're not only in fear of your lives, you're also in fear of other people's lives. And that's a tremendously difficult and uncomfortable position to be in. So you become you're cautious all the time, which is exhausting. But I think that's what abuse and control do to a human being. You just accept it. And I think that answers things like, why do people live under dictatorship forever, under fear? You know, I think in a minute way, when I look at what's going on in America right now, or, you know, in other societies, it's you know, because people, I think, are generally fearful. And if there's a dictatorship and censorship of freedom, things like that happen, and I think the instinct of human instinct generally is to listen to it and just survive within that. It's a horrifying notion, but I think that's why all these historical atrocities were allowed to have happened.
Well, imagine how she was living. She was taking notes, making notes every day. She would put it in her laptop computer and in a pen drive, and she had to be sure that nobody found that pen drive. So living for that many months with that constant fear, having a minder around her, making sure that she doesn't say anything that crosses the line that would give the students any information about the world outside. So how do you teach a class, say, even in essay writing, where you're not allowed to touch certain subjects? And then the other aspect that Suki touches upon in her book is how children, students, and adults were taught to lie. Lying was part of the culture. So if they were told to write an essay, the essay would be full of lies. If they were taken to, there were villages which were showpiece villages where a few people were healthy. There were fruit orchards which you went to where there were big apples. When the reality of it, that there was just only these single showpiece places, factories included, where tourists were taken and shown that there is food, but in reality people were in terrible shape. Even after the famine, the nutrition, the lack of education, lack of food is a serious problem. Now, you've written about how all of North Koreans participate in fooling tourists with showpiece homes, villages, as I said. They were taught, in fact, it was important to present a good image of North Korea. So hypocrisy, lying, cheating is part of a culture. We have a bit of that too over here, where lies of flattery, lies to get out of confrontation, because harmony is considered more important than honesty. But what do you think it does to human beings, to their inner being, when it is socially endorsed. For example, they said, and I'll read from your book, that I had begun to feel the same way when a student from class 1 said openly and unashamedly that the unfortunate thing about losing the trivia game was they had been caught cheating and should have cheated better. I wondered if it was possible that they had never been taught that lying was a bad thing. Perhaps they felt free to continue doing it as long as they could get away with it. Was it possible that they just did not know right from wrong?
I mean, I think that is a psychological abuse, really, you know? And I think that one of really most disturbing thing about North Korea is this inability to tell the truth from lies. And I think researching it all the time, that was really a big question. And that's why, in a way, I sort of stopped with the de facto research, because there was no way of verifying what they were claiming, no matter how horrible things were. So what that means is that when there is no verification process, you know, lies run rampant. So it's not only North Koreans lying, but I think the reporting about North Korea is often full of lies. So lies breed lies. And I think that sense in that country, when you have no real core of values, and I think that society is, in many ways, for generations to come, far bigger problem than simple case of will Korea's unify. That's not really a question. What are we going to do with 25 million people who have now psychologically been taught to not be able to differentiate truth from lies?
Now, Suki's problem was not only hiding the fact that she was a journalist there undercover, she also had to deal with the Christian evangelists. And that was, at many times, extremely stressful. She was, and I'll read from there, if you don't believe it, this is one of her Christian colleagues who is talking to Suki. She says, if you don't believe in taking a part of Jesus' body into you, she's talking about communion, you shouldn't receive the bread. I'm only saying this out of concern for you because harm will come to you if you take it and you're not a believer. I know it sounds like superstition, but it's not. Then she began telling me that she knew I cared for my students, but maybe my reason for being there was different from hers, which was solely to bring the Lord to this land. The Lord has his ways and his designs for these people, she told me, and it was her job to wake them up to be ready for his grace. Because Suki, this life here is temporary. They will be received by him in heaven. And then movies are, there is a, which you touched upon in your presentation, there's a sort of disagreement on which film is going to be shown. And Suki wanted to show Harry Potter. And the evangelists thought that was unchristian. So they wanted to show Narnia, which has some overtones of Christianity. And so this is what she was told. Movies are influential. The counterparts might not have a problem with Harry Potter, but we do. There's a reason why Narnia was chosen. He says so. He says so, meaning pointing to heaven. The ceiling, rather. Mary stormed out of the office furious. I'll never show that to any of my students, she shouted. What's your movie? What's your motive for wanting to show such filth to our students? This usually mild-mannered woman was visibly shaking with anger. What kind of a Christian are you? What would Christians around the world say about your decision to expose our students to such heresy? So you are really living an extremely schizophrenic life. You're pretending to be a teacher for the North Korean minders. You're pretending to be an evangelist with your Christians. It would have made anybody crazy. And hiding your pen drives and making notes and trying to slip in a little bit of information to your students without getting them or you into trouble. I have to ask you, it must have messed you up.
I mean, I think that nobody, you know, this was never going to be an easy project. And I think these sort of impossible to crack system, like North Korea, there's a reason why it's impossible. I mean, I think that the difficulty of the situation, there was, you know, I think if I stumbled upon it, then I might have found it impossible to do. So by the time I was ready to live inside, I've been following it for from 2002. So it's a decade of preparation in a way. So I think that, the biggest problem of being there was that perpetual fear that I would be sent to a gulag
also the isolation, because she wasn't allowed, she was allowed, but whatever she wrote in her emails would be read by her minders. So she could not describe the conditions. She could not describe how bad the food was, that they ate the same thing every single day. She could not describe the cold. There was, the electricity kept going off all the time. It wasn't always heated. It was freezing cold. The living conditions seemed to be extremely bleak. Now, not being able to communicate to anyone in your home the reality of what you're going through must have been extremely difficult. And even when you sent kind of coded information, they didn't understand.
Well, I think that, but, in some way, being embedded, I think as a journalist, when you are embedded is because you're trying to understand it without having to interview people, because interviews don't go anywhere under certain circumstances. So I think that the difficulty, tremendous difficulty that I was in was also how they lived in a different way. If they're always watching what they say, it's not that different from what I'm doing, except I'm doing hopefully temporary there. They're stuck there for the rest of their lives. And I think what I found most difficult was actually, as I began to fall in love with them more and more, realizing this is what their lives are. And that was horrifying to me.
Mm-hmm. Now we come towards the end of the session, before we take questions. The problems you faced in publishing the book, and you've written about it in the New Republic, on how your publisher decided to label it as a memoir, which took it out of the investigative journalism category, and that puts you in a different slot, making it like Eat, Pray, Love, and which is a whole different thing of searching for yourself, and you were actually consciously went there as a journalist, and then being reviewed. This book being reviewed as a memoir, which it is not, and then many people accusing you, including journalists, that you exploited the people there, betrayed them, fooled them in going there under pretense, and you were attacked for that by many people as well as in reviews. And I'll read the last paragraph of your article and then you can explain. You've written, "I am an investigative journalist. Please take me seriously. I had been excluded from the insular world of journalism. Perhaps in the end, my anger is a reaction to the exclusion. As a woman of color, entrenched in a profession still dominated by white men, I have been forced to use my writing not to explore topics of my own choosing or to investigate the world's complexities, but as a means to legitimize myself." And one of the things is that we, for example, when we live in India, we don't think we are people of color. We are normal, as far as we're concerned. It's only when you go to another country and you're seen as a brown person that suddenly you become aware of your situation. Now, you're a Korean living in America, which again puts you in another separate category. So can you talk about, one, your frustration with your publishers pushing your book into a category which was of no advantage to you personally, but except for their marketing technique that they thought that a memoir by a woman, and an Asian woman in quotes, sells better?
I think that, although India has a different issues, but I think as a woman, I think a lot of people probably could empathize with that, because I think that, men don't generally try to go into North Korea undercover to find themselves. It's not like a holiday for them. So I think that somehow by categorizing it as memoir, immediately I was pegged as a liar, but also it takes away my expertise. When you do investigate a subject for a decade, you are the expert. But the minute it's portrayed as a memoir, which is based on your feelings, not based on careful notes, reporting, then suddenly it is no longer expertise. It's actually kind of what she's thinking about it. So that is the part I think that is most disturbing, because as a woman, you are stripped of what you know best. And I think there is a really a part that I found it demoralizing after having pursued it as long as I did.
Do you think the United States underreacted when the student who had been imprisoned for taking a poster came back and he died because of the torture? Do you think that the American government underreacted to the situation?
No, I mean, the American government, that's what I wrote about in my op-ed in Washington Post. America used it as a political maneuver. Trump immediately said, at least we brought him home, meaning under Obama, we did not bring him home. No, they didn't bring him home. North Korea released the young man who's 21-year-old college student who's already been in coma for almost a year without alerting anybody and released him to die in America, not in North Korea. So there's nothing about that America did to bring him home. But I felt the fact that they used that for politically, manipulation was horrifying and inhumane.
So, okay, so we'll open it up to questions.
My name is Manan. My question is that what was your family reaction when you told them that you are going undercover to North Korea? How they reacted?
Well, my mother lost her brother to North Korea, so it's not a subject that was light at all in our family. She was so angry she actually couldn't talk to me at all. But, for anyone else in the audience pursuing something like this, which one of the things that I really kept was for a decade was hard to maintain was I didn't tell anybody about it. I told very few people because it's not like, why would I be, a lot of people, writers especially, love to tell their projects to everybody they know. But it's not that helpful, because I just didn't, my family barely knew what was going on. And also to spare their worries. And also, I didn't want that burden. It's really difficult when your mother's
worried. What did they think of your book?
Huh?
What did your mother and father think of your book?
I think they love it once I was out, but I think it always made them nervous. In a way, that's also their blind spot where they don't want to think about it. So they actually hardly ever discuss it. They liked it, they've read it, but they'd rather not talk about it because I think it makes them scared.
I think we found that also in India for the generation that dealt with the partition of India, unlike the Holocaust, which the Jews all over the world do like to revisit and make films and plays and write books about it. In India, most people do not want to address it. Yes, there are a few things have been done. Now there are museums being built in Amritsar on the partition. But generally, Indians' attitude is, it's over, we don't want to deal with it. Let's look to the future. It's a different cultural way of handling it. Yeah.
I have lived in Seoul, South Korea for 5 years and understand the anguish that your people went through when your country was divided and what they went through under Japanese occupation. My question to you is, what, in your opinion, can the world do today to help North Korea change?
What can the world do? I mean, I think that it is being informed is the first thing, and I think develop empathy. And the most I can do is try to, basically what I was trying to do was portray them as real people so people can relate to them. And I think that, we do that when we fall in love. Like when we see like somebody cute, we don't really care how they grew up, really. But if we fall in love, then we want to know like what their favorite color, what their favorite food. And I think this is just human nature. And I think that's that empathy where I think if people identify with these characters, relate to them, then they begin to care about it and try to learn more about North Korea. So I think that learning, being informed, first of all, being informed makes it, suddenly I think more you're informed, suddenly Kim Jong-un hair jokes are not that funny. There's nothing funny about that. So I think that inform is the first step. And then I think that there are things like, helping them through whatever organizations. But once the world begins caring, then I think people start discussing it more. And I feel like I already see that happening a little bit in the last few years even.
Hi, my name is Vakasha. What do you think has happened do you think there were any negative consequences for any of the people you associated with and worked with back in North Korea, say at the school or people you came in contact with as a result of the book? Do you think there was, or do you know if there was anything which happened to them?
It is, I think the biggest concern when you are doing a project like this is protecting the people in the book. It's the best I could do was, blur everybody's identity, eliminate any details that might be incriminating. Generally, the boys in the book come across as very loyal to the regime. That is the most I could do. I am not saying it's perfect method because I cannot say 100% that, I did it as best as I could. Not that I know of, no one was hurt. The school actually grew double in size. But, a project like this was going to be upsetting. The school was very upset by it, but the school did fine afterward, So, but I think some of it is your conscience and your honesty as a writer, that you keep everyone as safe as possible in your portrayal. There are a lot of things I cut and never included in the book. And that would have made the students really more lovely, I think, if I could have put some details in the book, but I just cut them.
Hi, I'm Mohit. The question I wanted to ask was, in this whole culture of mistrust, what did you feel about the family itself? Did they really trust each other? Because even a relationship between a man and a woman is actually two different people coming together. And do they really feel that the people they fall in love is somebody they can trust? Or is that also a plant or a room for mistrust?
Suki addresses it in her book. These kids are away from their families for a year. They're not allowed to have any contact with their parents. If the parents come, very often, like for a birthday, they have to leave a little bit of food or whatever they've brought at the gate. So you can imagine the loneliness. And I think Suki will describe best. And these are children of the elite, expected to be future leaders of North Korea. And I think Suki had some very interesting experiences about young men talking about their girlfriends.
Well, I think that this whole question of can families and relationships happen and exist the way we imagine relationships to be, I think that it's kind of multiple things at once. And this is why it's difficult to, I think, describe such an abused society. Think about it. Most young men go to army 17 years until 27. So if you're separated, during which time they're not really allowed to come home except a few times. It's a very small country. So what that means is you are separated from your family during most formative years, and you're just serving the nation. Also, role of your parents is incredibly dear to you. My students were always missing their moms all the time, keeping the photos on their heart. At the same time, there's a competition because the great leader is a father figure. So he's always, they tell North Koreans, he's more important than your biological parents. So I think it's almost like a cult religion where you're constantly torn. Yes, you love your family. At the same time, you might have to report on them. At the same time, there's a great leader. So there's like tiers, layers and layers, where it makes relationships very difficult from what we are used to in the rest of the world.
Hi, I'm just curious. Did you have a book deal before you left?
Yes, years before.
How many years before?
2011 I went in. I think I had it, we were talking about it from about 2009.
So you absolutely knew what you were going for. You were going to write this book, and somebody, and the publisher obviously knew what the content of the book was?
Yes, this was my second book, so I already had a contract.
It was the same publisher?
Before. It was a different publisher, but same editor.
Thank you.
So what is the difference between the surveillance that is in North Korea and US for that matter? A and B, is it do people support surveillance, mass surveillance when it is covert, for instance in US or for that matter in India?
I think that there are degrees to surveillance. It's impossible to have a perfect society. But what you're doing is watched. You have to be careful with what you're emailing. These things happen in the rest of the world also, especially America at the time. Assume also India. But North Korea, people are not allowed to go to the next town without a travel pass. They're not given the internet. They don't even know what that is. So when you're talking about surveillance system, this is a system of a prison in a way we've never seen before. So I don't think it's even comparable. The surveillance level is, I think that what North Korea is under is, we've just never seen that kind of control where nobody ever can move beyond what they're in. and have never seen anything else except in a case of solitary confinement, which is, I guess, what Sarah, that I was on a panel with, writes about.
And there are no choices in the sense the food is limited. They only are given prescribed books which are only about the leader.
Jobs are assigned to you. Subjects you study are assigned to you. There's no choice. It's completely under the decision of the regime. What you basically, I think the individual person's will is not recognized whatsoever on every level.
And this is a generation that's grown up in their psyche. They don't know anything beyond that, which means they don't know other people in the world have choices on what television channels to watch, what movies to see, what books. They think that the rest of the world is the same as theirs. Imagine that. Yeah.
My name is Rohit. I write for the Huffington Post and The Wire. Could you explain this Christian evangelical connection? How did the North Koreans even allow that? Did they know they were evangelists? What was the deal there? I'm very curious.
So the evangelicals, their deal was to not proselytize. So they'll go in there, give all the money to fund the school, but they're just never allowed to talk about their religion, because proselytizing is an executionable crime in North Korea. So why the school was there, why evangelicals are pouring all the money into North Korea, because that population are one of the easiest to convert. I mean, they are already devout to their great leader. When the great leader falls, the next God will take over. So it's not that surprising, logically, when you think about it, that evangelicals are in there.
And they were giving subtle messages.
And subtly, yeah, it's a long-term project also from an evangelical point of view, because ultimately, people will be converted. Meanwhile, that I don't really care about. There's really, really disturbing aspect to that. But really, what's more disturbing is that you can't really do a project like that in North Korea unless you're handing cash over to the regime. So how much are you handing over to the regime? How much of that money is used to suppress the people? What, for the sake of missionary purpose? It's a very disturbing idea.
And Suki was under, threat all the time she was there, because if at any point they suspected or discovered, she'd be off to one of the prison camps. That would be the end of the story. So thank you very much,
Thank
Suki.
you.
I think it was really informative, and I think people understood a lot more than what they knew before. Thank you.